Have you ever wondered if the miracles in the Bible really happened? What if everything we've been told is just one big illusion? Today, we're going to face the truth head on and expose what's really behind biblical miracles. Get ready for a journey that could change the way you see faith and reality. Throughout history, these events have been used as proof of God's existence. But what if these proofs are just distorted stories? If you're ready to open your eyes and discover what really happened, keep watching. But be warned, after this video, you may never see miracles the same way again. When we talk about miracles, we immediately think of Moses parting the sea, Jesus healing the sick, Elijah bringing fire from heaven. But who are the real protagonists of this story? Were they these men, or the belief we've created over the centuries? Biblical miracles have shaped religions, cultures, and even governments. They have been used as proof of God's existence and the authority of His chosen ones. But there's one detail that almost no one questions. Did these events really happen, or were they just powerful narratives to control, inspire, and influence? In this investigation, miracles cease to be just stories about great spiritual leaders and become a tool of power, transformation, and, who knows, manipulation. What happens when the truth comes out? That's what we're going to find out. Imagine a world where miracles never happened. No sea parted, no water turned to wine, no dead came back to life. What if everything we call a miracle was just a myth created over the centuries? How would that change our view of faith, religion, and even the existence of God? That's the question that guides our investigation. If miracles had never been recorded, the history of humanity would have taken a different course. Without Jesus' supernatural healings, would Christianity have spread so powerfully? Without the extraordinary signs in the Old Testament, would the Hebrews have followed Moses out of Egypt? If Elijah had never made fire fall from the sky, would he have been respected as a prophet or simply ignored as just another preacher? Miracles were not just isolated events. They served as validation of divine power. Whenever God wanted to confirm His authority through someone, something extraordinary happened. But what if all of this was just a set of narratives altered over the years? A reflection of the human need to believe in the impossible. The desire for something supernatural is rooted in humanity. Since ancient times, we have sought answers to inexplicable phenomena. Thunder was once considered manifestations of the wrath of the gods. Eclipses were seen as signs of the end times. Earthquakes were divine punishments. Everything we couldn't explain was attributed to the divine. Within this context, biblical miracles may have arisen in the same way. A rare event, misunderstood in its time, may have been recorded as a direct sign from God. But is that really what happened? Think of the crossing of the Red Sea. The biblical account says that Moses raised his staff and the waters parted, allowing the people to pass on dry ground. Scientists suggest that this event may have been caused by a natural phenomenon called wind set-down, in which strong, continuous winds pushed the water away, creating a temporary passage. Is it possible that the Hebrews simply crossed at a time of low tide and interpreted this as a divine act? Another famous example is the resurrection of Lazarus. He was given up for dead, stayed in the tomb for 4 days, and then was brought back to life by Jesus. But medical diagnoses at the time were rudimentary. Was he really dead, or just in a state of deep unconsciousness? If Lazarus had only suffered a prolonged faint or entered a catatonic state, that would explain why he came back to life without there actually being a supernatural miracle involved. There's also the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. The narrative tells us that Jesus took a few foods and multiplied them to feed thousands. But some scholars suggest a different interpretation. Perhaps Jesus encouraged sharing. People who were there with their own provisions may have decided to share when they saw the generosity around them. Instead of a physical miracle of multiplication, it could have been a social miracle of transformation of hearts. If we stop to analyze history with more critical eyes, we will realize that many of these events could have natural explanations. Does this diminish the importance of faith? Some people would say yes. If miracles were just exaggerated interpretations of common events, then there is no longer any reason to believe in the supernatural. Others, however, would argue that miracles don't need to be literal to have meaning. Perhaps the real miracle is not in the event itself, but in the way it impacts people. But what about when miracles become a tool of power? If these events were used to legitimize religious leaders and strengthen institutions, what was the impact of this on humanity? Without miracles, would faith have spread in the same way? Or would it have been just another philosophy of life among so many others? The question that remains is whether we really need miracles to believe. If tomorrow we discovered that none of them happened as described, would faith cease to exist? Humanity has always needed stories to connect with the divine. Miracles have always been presented as manifestations of the divine, irrefutable signs that God was acting in human history. But to understand the impact of these stories, we need to look beyond the narratives and examine the context in which they arose. The ancient world was full of supernatural beliefs, and a society without scientific explanations depended on miraculous accounts to understand what was beyond its comprehension. But were these miracles just symbolic answers for a people who needed to believe? The characters who starred in these stories were not just spiritual figures, but also leaders who needed to convince crowds that they possessed divine authority. Moses, for example, was not just a man of faith, but a strategist, leading a desperate people in search of a new land. If he had only said that God had chosen him, would it have been enough for thousands to follow him through the desert? The supernatural signs that surrounded his leadership, the burning bush, the plagues of Egypt, the opening of the sea, were fundamental for him to maintain control over the situation. If these events had not occurred exactly as narrated, how did Moses achieve this blind obedience from such a disbelieving and suffering people? Jesus also needed signs for his message to gain strength. He was not just a charismatic preacher. He was someone who changed history through the impact he had on people. But would the essence of his ministry have been the same if the miracles were just metaphors? Without the healings, without the resurrection, without the physical transformation of the world around him, would his message have been enough to change the trajectory of humanity? Jesus could have been just a wise teacher, a revolutionary with impactful words. But without the miracles, would the worship of him have been the same? Miracles have always been an essential element for religious leaders to be accepted and recognized as sent by God. Elijah, one of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament, challenged the priests of Baal by asking for fire from heaven to prove that his God was the true one. Was this story recorded to affirm the sovereignty of God or to consolidate Elijah's power as a prophet? In a society based on rituals and symbols, the need to demonstrate divine power was unquestionable. But did the fire really fall from the sky? Or was there another explanation for what happened that day? The people who witnessed these miracles had a different worldview than ours. For them, the supernatural was a natural part of life. The wind blowing strongly could be the voice of God. An eclipse was a divine sign, and an unexpected cure was proof of a higher power. This context shaped the way miracles were recorded, as there was no clear separation between the spiritual and the real. What was interpreted as divine may have simply been an unusual event, but within that reality, these interpretations became incontestable truths. Over the centuries, miracles became increasingly powerful symbols used to strengthen faith and justify doctrines. Churches grew on these stories, empires were influenced by them, and even wars were fought in the name of what was believed to be a divine intervention. The power of miracles was not only in their occurrence, but in what they represented to those who believed. But what if the miracles weren't real? What if everything was just a control mechanism created to ensure the obedience of a people? The study of history and the psychology of belief shows us that human beings have a deep need to trust in something greater. In times of uncertainty, miracles brought comfort, showing that there was a greater force guiding events. The healings performed by Jesus may have been simply explained by the placebo effect, by the power of suggestion, or even by inaccurate diagnoses of the time. But would the impact of these healings have been less if they were only the result of people's faith and not of a literal miracle? In a world without miracles, would people still have found hope? Or would faith lose its strength, becoming just a set of moral teachings? If miracles are unmasked, does religion lose its foundation or adapt to continue existing? These are the questions we need to ask before confronting the truth behind the sacred narratives. Faith has always been sustained by signs and wonders. But what happens when these signs are questioned? The conflict begins when we realize that without miracles, many religious truths may lose their foundation. If the supernatural events of the Bible are just metaphors, can faith still stand? For many, the answer is yes. But for others, the absence of concrete evidence can be devastating. The investigation of miracles is not just about science versus religion, but about a clash between what we want to believe and what the facts suggest. Centuries of doctrines and traditions have been built on these stories. Thousands of people have given their lives believing that God acted directly in the world through these events. Questioning miracles is not just a historical or academic issue. It is a threat to the very meaning of faith. If everything was just an illusion, how do we deal with the consequences of that? While some see this discovery as liberation, others see it as an attack on what is most sacred. The resistance to questioning miracles does not only come from the fear of losing faith, but from the impact that this truth can have on people's identity. For centuries, we have believed that the impossible was possible because God intervened in history. But if miracles are unmasked, where does that leave us? The truth can be liberating, but it can also be uncomfortable. The accounts of miracles have always had a pattern. Something extraordinary happens. People witness it. The story spreads and becomes a symbol of faith. But over the centuries, how many of these stories have been altered, exaggerated, or even invented? Is it possible to trace each miracle and find its origin? And more importantly, what happens when we discover that many of these events were never documented outside of sacred texts? The central question of the conflict is not just whether miracles happened or not, but how the belief in them shaped our society. Without miracles, what is left of faith? Would people continue to believe only in the message, without the need for supernatural evidence? The idea of a God who acts in the world through miracles has always been a central pillar of religions. But what if this idea is just a human creation, based on stories that have been passed down from generation to generation until they become incontestable? At this point in the investigation, the tension increases. The audience begins to realize that we are not just discussing old stories, but questioning something much deeper: the role of miracles in the construction of faith and religious power. As we move forward, we approach a revelation that could change everything. Miracles have always been presented as divine signs, but throughout history, they've also been used as tools for power, manipulation, and control. While some believe these supernatural events were genuine proof of God's existence, others see miracles as carefully constructed narratives to strengthen religions and consolidate spiritual leaders. If miracles are debunked, what else might be hidden beneath centuries of tradition? In different eras and cultures, accounts of miracles have always emerged at crucial moments. In times of crisis, persecution, or major change, miracles appeared as a divine response. But there's a pattern to it. When Moses needed to convince Pharaoh to free the Hebrews, the plagues of Egypt arose. When Elijah wanted to prove that God was more powerful than Baal, fire fell from the sky. When Jesus began his ministry, miracles started happening in rapid succession, attracting crowds. Is it possible that these events were exaggerated to strengthen the message of these leaders? Another complexity in this debate is how different religions recorded similar supernatural events. If the biblical miracles are real, how do you explain stories of healings, resurrections, and extraordinary phenomena also appearing in other spiritual traditions, like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam? Have all these religions witnessed the same divine force? Or are miracles a cultural and psychological phenomenon, a human need to believe in the extraordinary? Furthermore, there's the impact of miracles on controlling the masses. Throughout history, belief in supernatural events has been used to validate the power of kings, priests, and religious leaders. If a man can perform miracles, then he must have been chosen by God. This thinking led crowds to follow spiritual leaders without question, because challenging these men meant challenging God himself. But what happens when we discover that many of these events lack any historical evidence? What happens to the authority of those who rely on these miracles to justify their position? There's another important element: modern miracles. Even today, there are reports of inexplicable healings, visions, weeping statues, and celestial apparitions. But when investigated thoroughly, many of these stories are debunked as frauds, coincidences, or misinterpretations. Why do people still believe without questioning? Is faith really about miracles or about the need to find meaning in life? As we delve deeper into this question, the plot thickens. We're not just questioning the existence of miracles, but analyzing why they've been so important to humanity and how belief in them has shaped society. If miracles are nothing more than legends, what does that mean for those who have placed their entire lives in that belief? As the investigation progresses, we begin to notice something disturbing. There are no reliable historical records that prove the biblical miracles. No external document mentions Moses parting the Red Sea. No archaeological evidence corroborates the plagues of Egypt. No independent account confirms that Jesus multiplied loaves and fishes or resurrected Lazarus. If these events really happened, why are there no records outside the Scriptures? This is the moment when everything changes. The search for truth leads us to an uncomfortable revelation. Miracles, as they've been narrated, may never have happened. The biblical texts were written decades or even centuries after the events they describe. Many stories have gone through countless translations, edits, and adaptations over time. What guarantees that the accounts we have today haven't been modified to strengthen faith and give more credibility to religious figures? The discoveries don't stop there. Researchers find evidence that many of the biblical miracles may have been inspired by older myths. Stories of resurrections, miraculous healings, and even events like the multiplication of food appear in cultures predating Christianity. Were miracles copied and adapted to construct a more convincing narrative? The twist intensifies when we realize that even within the Bible itself, there are contradictions about miracles. Some Gospels report events that others don't even mention. In certain passages, the descriptions are vague and open to interpretation. This raises a crucial question. Were the miracles real, or were they shaped to serve a greater purpose? Now, the story reaches a critical moment. If miracles are debunked, what's left of faith? Can belief survive without supernatural proof? The revelation that miracles may never have happened the way they were narrated causes a real storm. For some, this discovery is liberating. Faith, once based on supernatural events, can now be rebuilt on something more solid. The message, the ethics, the transformative impact of the words and actions of those who have marked history. If miracles were just symbols, that doesn't mean faith is useless. It just means it can exist without needing spectacular proof. But for others, this revelation is a devastating blow. Many clung to miracles as concrete evidence of God's existence. Without miracles, what's left? If Jesus didn't multiply the loaves, if Moses didn't part the sea, if Elijah didn't bring fire from the sky, then all the certainties that have sustained the faith of millions of people throughout the centuries begin to crumble. Some feel betrayed, deceived by a story that was told as absolute truth, but now seems fragile in the face of critical and historical analysis. The reaction of religious institutions is not long in coming. The attempt to discredit this investigation grows rapidly. For them, miracles cannot be questioned because they are the foundation of faith. Pastors, priests, and theologians are divided between those who try to reinterpret miracles as metaphors and those who insist that doubt is the work of disbelief. In certain circles, the revelation is seen as a direct attack on Christianity itself, and resistance intensifies. Meanwhile, many ordinary people begin to wonder, what now? What does it mean to have faith without miracles? If the stories have been shaped, altered, and transmitted with exaggeration over the centuries, does that mean we should abandon everything? Or does the essence of spirituality not depend on supernatural events, but on the inner transformation that these stories provoke? The consequences of this discovery don't only affect religious people. Science itself, which has been trying to unravel the mysteries behind miracles for centuries, faces a dilemma. If people still want to believe, even without evidence, what does that say about the nature of belief? Maybe miracles were never about defying the laws of physics, but about something much deeper, the human need to believe in the impossible. Now, the question that remains is, what do we do with this truth? Do we accept that miracles are just stories, or do we find a new meaning for faith? The answer may define the future of spirituality. Faced with the revelation that miracles may not have happened the way they were narrated, an inevitable dilemma arises: how to move forward. For many, faith has always been linked to the supernatural, to impossible events that confirmed the divine presence. But now, without miracles, what's left? It is at this moment that a process of reconstruction begins. Some people, after the initial shock, realize that spirituality can go beyond signs and wonders. The central message of faith, love of neighbor, the search for truth, personal transformation, continues to exist, regardless of miraculous events. The true strength of faith is not in waiting for miracles, but in living in a way that impacts the world around us. Others, however, face a deeper crisis. Without miracles, the feeling that God is active in the world seems to disappear. The idea of a God who intervenes directly in history becomes more difficult to sustain. For these people, accepting that miracles may be just symbolic narratives requires enormous emotional effort. Some completely abandon faith, while others find new forms of spirituality based on philosophy, ethics, and personal growth. Interestingly, there are also those who feel strengthened by this discovery. Without the need to believe in supernatural phenomena, they begin to see faith in a more mature way. It's not about waiting for God to solve everything, but about taking responsibility for one's own choices. The idea of an external miracle loses strength, and the true miracle becomes inner transformation, the courage to face challenges without waiting for magical intervention. This transition does not happen overnight. It is a difficult process, full of doubts and uncertainties. But in the end, those who overcome this moment come out stronger, because the faith that survives the absence of miracles is not fragile. It is a faith built on something deeper than visible signs. It is a faith that sustains itself even when everything that was considered certain crumbles. In the end, this journey is not just about questioning miracles. It's about understanding what really matters. If faith is only about believing in extraordinary things, it becomes dependent on external evidence. But if faith is about transformation, about seeking good, about growing as a human being, then it can survive any questioning. And so, those who face this truth head-on discover something unexpected. Faith does not need miracles to exist. It just needs people willing to live it authentically. The journey in search of the truth about miracles reaches a decisive moment. The faith of many has been shaken, while others have found a new way to see spirituality without needing supernatural events. But before we reach a definitive conclusion, we must face one last and inevitable question. If miracles have been debunked, what happens now? Without miracles, does God still manifest in the world? Or has He never intervened in the way we have always believed? This question resonates in different groups of people. For some, the absence of concrete evidence for biblical miracles reinforces the idea that faith must be completely reformulated. For others, faith continues to be a mystery that goes beyond what science can explain. The question is not only historical or theological, but emotional and existential. How to redefine something so deeply rooted in humanity? The reactions are diverse. Some religious communities begin to reinterpret miracles symbolically, highlighting that they do not need to be literal to have spiritual value. For these people, Moses did not need to have parted the Red Sea for his story to be inspiring. Jesus did not need to have multiplied loaves and fishes for his message of compassion to be true. The impact of faith does not need scientific proof. It is enough that it transforms lives. But not everyone accepts this new vision. There are those who refuse to question any aspect of the biblical narrative, insisting that the miracles happened exactly as they were described. For these groups, doubt is dangerous, as it represents a direct attack on the authority of the Scriptures. In response to the revelations, some religions double down on their resistance, arguing that faith does not need proof and that any attempt at rational explanation is a trap to turn people away from God. At the same time, in the midst of this division, a new understanding emerges. If miracles were just stories created to inspire, then the real power was never in the supernatural events, but in people's belief in them. Faith was never about irrefutable proof, but about the human need to find meaning, purpose, and hope. Even if the miracles did not occur as they were narrated, the message they carry remains powerful. It is at this point that the tension reaches its peak. We are about to confront the definitive truth. Without miracles, can faith still survive? If so, what remains of it? If not, what does that mean for billions of people around the world? The climax is about to happen, and the answers may be more impactful than anyone imagined. The truth is finally coming to light. The miracles didn't happen as we believed. No sea parted, no one walked on water, and no one resurrected after days of decomposition. Centuries of faith, tradition, and belief have been built on events that, when rigorously analyzed, lack concrete evidence outside of religious scriptures. What seemed like a divine sign may have been just a metaphor, exaggeration, or even invention. Now that everything has been exposed, the inevitable question arises: what's left? The impact of this discovery is immense. For those who have always based their faith on miracles, the collapse of these stories creates a devastating void. What does it mean to believe if the events that supported that belief never happened? Without miracles, does God still exist? Does He still care? What about those who have dedicated their entire lives to faith, believing they were healed, saved, or protected by supernatural events? The feeling of betrayal and disillusionment is overwhelming. At the same time, another reaction emerges. Some people see this revelation not as a loss, but as an awakening. If the miracles were never real, then the true strength of faith wasn't in them, but in the people who believed in them. The inner transformation, the impact of the messages, the way faith changed lives, that's what's real. The stories may have been altered, but what they inspired continues to exist. But there's a third group, those who see this truth as a final blow against religious institutions that used miracles as absolute proof of their authority. If the miracles weren't real, how many other doctrines were created to manipulate and control? How many traditions were established not by divine revelation, but by human interests? For these people, this discovery not only weakens traditional faith, but exposes a system that has remained unquestioned for centuries. The confrontation between these three groups reaches its peak. On one side, those who cling to the belief that, regardless of any evidence, faith transcends the need for proof. On the other, those who feel they have been deceived and can no longer trust what they once believed. And in the middle, those who try to find a balance, who seek to rebuild a meaning for faith without needing supernatural events to support it. The world will never be the same after this revelation. Some churches will resist, insisting that miracles are real and that doubt is a test of faith. Others, perhaps, will accept this change and try to reinvent themselves. But for each individual, the final decision will be personal. Continue believing, reshape their faith, or abandon it altogether. In the end, the question that remains is, what is more important? The miracles or what we believe because of them? Because if faith cannot survive without supernatural proof, then perhaps it was never as strong as we imagined. For centuries, faith has been sustained by supernatural events, by signs and wonders that ensured that God was present and active in the world. But if these events never happened the way they were told, then what's left? That's the question that haunts millions of people who face this revelation. For some, the answer is clear. Without miracles, faith has no foundation. If God didn't part the Red Sea, if Jesus didn't walk on water, if Lazarus never resurrected, then everything built around these stories becomes doubtful. Many people abandon belief, unable to accept a faith that was sustained by stories that don't stand up to historical and scientific analysis. The void that remains is immense. What was once certainty now becomes doubt. What was once a divine promise now seems just an old tale without any concrete basis. Others, however, find a new path. For them, miracles were never the center of faith. The true strength has always been in the message, love for others, the search for truth, inner transformation. None of this depends on supernatural events. Faith can continue to exist without the need for divine proof. On the contrary, perhaps this is an opportunity to mature spiritually, to move away from dependence on signs and learn to walk only based on what really matters: ethics, values, and the impact of spirituality on people's lives. But there's a third group, those who feel deceived, not just because miracles have been questioned, but because they have been used as a tool of control for centuries. How many people have been manipulated? How many institutions have strengthened themselves by exploiting blind belief in the supernatural? For these, the revelation that miracles may have been just myths opens a new chapter of revolt and questioning. What else has been distorted? What else has been told as absolute truth when, in reality, it was just a human construct. Faced with this new scenario, there are two possibilities. Faith can collapse completely, or it can reinvent itself. Perhaps we will never look at miracles the same way again. Perhaps we will never see faith as something untouchable, above any questioning. But it is also possible that this discovery leads us to a new kind of belief, more mature, more conscious, more real. In the end, the big question that remains is, do we need miracles to believe? If faith only exists in the presence of supernatural events, then it is fragile. But if it can survive without signs and wonders, then perhaps it never depended on them to exist. What is more important, the miracles or the impact that faith has had on humanity? The answer is up to each of us. The miracles have been questioned, but faith continues. Some cling to it without needing proof. Others abandon it because they no longer find meaning. In the end, belief has always been more about what we feel than about what we see. If the miracles never happened, is their impact still real? If so, then perhaps the true miracle was never the event itself, but the transformation it generated in people. From the beginning, miracles have been used as proof of God's existence. They were the evidence that He intervened in history, that the chosen ones had divine authority, and that faith was more than just words. But now that we question these events, an inevitable dilemma arises. Without miracles, is there still faith? This question may seem frightening to some. Faith has always been fueled by the extraordinary, by the impossible becoming real. But is that a problem? Or is it an opportunity to finally understand that spirituality doesn't depend on the supernatural? Perhaps that is the great lesson of this questioning. If we look back, we will realize that faith has shaped humanity in ways that go far beyond miracles. The search for a purpose, the need to believe in something greater, the transformation of people through compassion and love, all of this has always existed. And none of this depends on a supernatural event. Jesus' miraculous healings inspired millions, but the message He preached about love and forgiveness would still be valid, even if there were no healing involved. Moses led a people to freedom and gave them a new identity, and that would have been significant even without seas parting. The question then is not whether the miracles were real or not. The question is, do we need them to give meaning to our faith? If the answer is yes, then it means that our belief is fragile, sustained only by the extraordinary. But if the answer is no, then it means that faith can be more than just believing in impossible events. It can be a commitment to values, to ethics, to personal and social transformation. Perhaps this is the true revolution of faith. Instead of waiting for signs from the heavens, we can focus on how we make the world better. Instead of seeking miracles, we can be the miracle in someone's life. True change has never come from supernatural events. It came from the people who, believing or not in miracles, decided to make a difference. And what if that is the true miracle? If the impact of these stories is more important than their veracity, what really transforms the world is not the wonders recorded in ancient texts, but the effect they had on the way we live and relate. If the miracles fall to the ground, but faith continues to guide us to good, then perhaps we never needed them to begin with. Now, the final question is for you. What does your faith mean to you? Does it depend on miracles, or is there something deeper that sustains it? Do we need miracles to believe, or can faith exist without them? Now, I want to know your opinion. Have you ever questioned a miracle? Have you ever wondered if these stories may have been misinterpreted over time? Would your faith be the same if you discovered that these events didn't happen as they were narrated? Leave your comment below. I really want to know how you see this issue. If this video moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear this reflection. Maybe this conversation will help someone see faith in a new way. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because in the next videos, we will explore even more intriguing questions like this. If you want to see this discussion happen, leave a like and stay tuned to the channel. Thank you for following along, and remember, the true miracle may not be in extraordinary events, but in the way we choose to live our faith. See you in the next video.